Brazil's first general strike in more than 20 years has ended in violence as protesters clashed with police in several cities. In Rio de Janeiro, at least 8 buses were torched as police launched rounds of tear gas and rubber bullets at masked demonstrators. In Sao Paulo, the rally route led to President Michel Temer's residence. Unions had called the strike to voice anger at the president's attempts to push tough austerity measures through Congress, including a proposed minimum age for retirement. Earlier this week, the lower house approved a bill to weaken labour laws by relaxing restrictions on outsourcing and temporary contracts. Temer argues that reforms are needed to slash the budget deficit and pull the country out of its worst recession on record. Unions countered that the poor should not pay the price for the country's economic problems. The government is also in the grip of a corruption scandal in which many top politicians have been implicated, including several of Temer's ministers, further fueling discontent.
Cansados de la corrupción, estamos cansados de que no se respeten las leyes, cansados, el Paraguay no se calla.
Venezuela's security forces have clashed with opposition protesters for another day as the death toll from the anti-government unrest reaches at least 29. Amid the turmoil, the government announced it is to quit the Organization of American States, or OAS, in anger at pressure over the government's handling of the crisis. The OAS voiced concern over the state of democracy in the country, which has seen its worst violence since 2014.
NATO has expanded further into Eastern Europe. That's after lawmakers in the small Balkan state of Montenegro unanimously voted for the country's accession to the military bloc. Now, the vote happened despite mass protests outside the parliament building, with opponents calling for a referendum on the decision.
Montenegro's government officials say that joining NATO will bring stability and economic benefits after centuries of turmoil. The pro-NATO coalition holds a majority of seats in parliament, but the pro-Russian opposition boycotted the session.
Montenegro was invited to join in December 2015, making NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe the first one in 6 years. By May of last year, the protocol for accession was signed, but to become a full member, all 28 current member states must agree. But both Spain and the Netherlands have yet to give their approval. Now let's take a look at why Montenegro a Balkan country of just over 600,000 people, is seen as a strategic stepping stone. It has a small army of just about 2,000 troops and only a dozen helicopters or so, but it is thought its membership will help provide NATO complete control of the Adriatic Sea. That's because other Adriatic nations like Albania, Croatia, and Italy are already members of the alliance. But given the recent mass protests, the benefits for both the bloc and Montenegro, well, they're being questioned.
There have been fresh clashes in the West Bank between Israeli forces and Palestinians protesting over prisoners in Israeli jails. Palestinian political parties have called today a day of rage as anger swells over poor conditions in Israeli prisons. It's thought around 1,500 inmates are staging an open-ended hunger strike against Israel's policy of detention without charges or trial that's been applied since the 1980s. The action was called for by prominent prisoner Marwan Barghouti, who's widely seen as a possible future Palestinian president. On Thursday, Palestinians throughout the West Bank and the Gaza Strip observed a general strike in support of the hunger-striking prisoners and detainees. Israel has vowed not to negotiate with the hunger strikers.
Reporters Without Borders released its annual World Press Freedom Index on April 25, highlighting a rise of strongmen and corresponding decline in media freedom. The report says, quote, "We have reached the age of post-truth, propaganda and suppression of freedoms, especially in democracies." Norway topped the list for press freedom, while North Korea came in last. Meanwhile, Syria remains the deadliest country for journalists, while Turkey was highlighted as, quote, "the world's biggest prison for media professionals." The report also points to Donald Trump and the Brexit campaign as causes of a, quote, "highly toxic anti-media discourse," with the US and UK coming in at 43rd and 40th. The Philippines rose 11 spots with fewer journalists killed. However, the country ranks 127th and remains one of the most dangerous for the press.
Tensions are rising tonight as North Korea attempts to launch another mid-range ballistic missile. But for the second time this month, the test fire ended in a failure. President Trump, who yesterday said the U.S. was potentially headed towards, quote, major conflict with North Korea, weighed in on this rapidly developing situation on Twitter, writing, quote, "North Korea disrespected the wishes of China and its highly respected president when it launched, though unsuccessfully, a missile today. Bad."
Now, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has warned there's a real threat North Korea could launch a nuclear attack on South Korea or Japan, and it's only a matter of time before the regime develops the capability to strike the U.S. mainland. Chairing a special meeting at the UN Security Council on Friday local time, Tillerson stated that the Trump administration is willing to counteract North Korean aggression with military action and won't hesitate to slap secondary sanctions on third country companies and individuals supporting the North. He said the status quo of threats and provocations is no longer acceptable and the world should act before North Korea does.
But the catastrophic effects of a North Korean nuclear strike outweigh any economic benefits. We must be willing to face the hard truths and make hard choices right now to prevent disastrous outcomes in the future. Business as usual is not an option. Lastly, as we have said before, all options for responding to future provocation must remain on the table. Diplomatic and financial levers of power will be backed up by a willingness to counteract North Korean aggression with military action.
There could hardly be a clearer threat to world peace more demanding of a unified response than the activities of one member of the United Nations, North Korea.
Now, this approach didn't really receive any support from Russia and China, who were pretty adamant in being opposed to any use of force.
Given the grave situation, China urges all parties to remain calm and restrain from any provocative rhetoric or actions that can lead to escalation. The use of force will not solve any differences, but can lead to disastrous consequences.
The threat of confrontation in the Korean Peninsula is now higher than ever before. Hostile rhetoric and military muscle flexing has left everybody wondering whether we should expect war. But we want to reiterate that military action is not an option and could lead to catastrophe in the region.
Beneath an unassuming house about an hour east from Osaka is Seiichiro Nishimoko's life project. The model of a shelter built to withstand the force of a nuclear attack. He uses it as a showcase to sell purification systems designed to strip radiation and poisonous gas from the air. They cost as much as $30,000. He's never been busier. Getting too many calls to handle, he had to take his number off the company website.
When I started 55 years ago, people said I was a fool, crazy, and they mocked me. The time has now come for me to help protect the lives of the people and families.
One security expert puts the chances of a North Korea missile attack at 50-50. Japan has a sophisticated anti-missile defense system, but if an attack is launched, it'll most likely be multiple missiles. That makes it tough to shoot them all down. Takashi Kawakami says that if North Korean leader Kim Jong-un decides to pull the trigger, he will launch whatever he has.
It looked like targeting to a U.S. base in Japan, but maybe not. Even that maybe they are going targeting to a big city maybe. We are not sure, because in the case of that, Kim Jong-un probably think about the wow, this is a final chance for his life.
And fear of that is growing in Japan. Visits to the government webpage on disaster and attack preparedness have risen recently.
I'm genuinely scared. You never know when something is going to happen. The alert system was set off by mistake a number of times, and even if it's activated, I wouldn't know where to run.
I am worried, but when I read about them, I hear they use old recycled parts for their weapons, but they can't be undermined, and that makes me anxious.
Some risk psychology experts say this fear is out of proportion to reality, fanned by the near constant media coverage on the growing tension.
There is fear about the unknown, but it is a fictitious, imaginary fear. What they feel is fear stoked by the government.
Regardless of where the fear is coming from, it's moving some Japanese to prepare for nuclear attack. Seiichiro Nishimoko says conflict is part of the human saga, and that's bound to keep him busy for the foreseeable future.
China is building the world's largest submarine factory, so big that it will be able to accommodate the construction of 4 subs at once. Bohai Shipbuilding Heavy Industrial Corporation is putting the finishing touches on its new facility, which will begin production later this year. The company is China's only builder of nuclear submarines, building both nuclear attack submarines and nuclear ballistic missile submarines. Its new assembly hall measures more than 430,000 square feet and has enough room for 2 parallel production lines. Each production line is reportedly broken into 2 parts, one dedicated to assembling submarine modules, and the other for finishing the hull with quieting measures. That means there's enough space for 4 subs to be built simultaneously. While the mega factory provides a controlled environment for development and construction, it will also keep subs hidden from prying eyes.
New clashes have erupted between the Turkish army and the Syrian Kurdish militia, seen as a terrorist group by Ankara. The Turkish army claimed rockets were fired on Friday from an area in Syria controlled by the Kurdish People's Protection Unit, or YPG. It targeted a Turkish army command post in the country's southern Sanlufra province. The Turkish army said it fired back, killing 11 terrorists, and reported no casualties from their side. That was the 3rd consecutive day of clashes across the tense border. Earlier this week, the Turkish Air Force bombed YPG targets in Syria. Both the US and Russia have condemned the clashes as unacceptable.
And a convoy of U.S. armored vehicles has reportedly rolled into areas in northern Syria along the border with Turkey. A deployment of U.S. troops that started on Friday is still underway. A U.S. military convoy is stationed in the village of Darabasiya. American troops are expected to align with the Syrian Democratic Forces. Developments came after cross-border fire between the Turkish military and Kurdish forces.
4 Iraqi policemen have been killed when a car bomb was detonated outside their station in an attack claimed by the so-called Islamic State. 5 people were also wounded in the blast in the capital's Karada neighborhood. The attack comes as Iraqi forces struggle to push back ISIL forces in the northern city of Mosul, the last key stronghold of the jihadist group in the country. Government forces have surrounded the militants in the northwestern quarter, including the Old City, which is home to the Grand Al-Nouri Mosque, where their leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared a caliphate over parts of Iraq and Syria in 2014. Earlier in the week, Iraqi troops captured Hatra, cutting off several desert routes used by ISIL to move between the two countries.
Afghan Taliban says it will target foreign forces in its spring offensive operation Mansouri this year. Well, in a statement, the militant group said it would employ strategies from conventional attacks to guerrilla operations. The operation is named after the group's former leader, who was killed by a U.S. drone strike last May. The announcement comes days after the group killed more than 140 people in a raid on an army base in the north of the country, in one of its deadliest assaults since 2001 U.S.-led invasion.
Begin with U.S. President Donald Trump's latest move to expand domestic energy production. Now, as his leadership reaches the 100-day mark, President Trump signed another executive order which he said would unleash American energy and create thousands of jobs. Now, this order calls for a review of offshore areas where oil and gas drilling are currently banned. It concerns swaths of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans, along with the Gulf of Mexico, while Barack Obama's administration had ruled this off limits. Now, this document also lifts a ban on certain parts of the Arctic being surveyed for oil and gas. Environmentalists have pledged to fight the order in court, but it will please many in the fossil fuel industries that Trump is actually fulfilling a campaign promise to do away with the Obama-era rules.
President Trump fired up gun owners this afternoon in Atlanta. He became the first sitting president to address the NRA, the National Rifle Association convention, since Ronald Reagan in 1983.
Well, President Trump discussed few specific policy details on gun legislation, but he left no doubt as to his support for the right to bear arms. Listen.
The 8-year assault on your Second Amendment freedoms has come to a crashing end.
That message resonated well with members of the NRA, an organization that endorsed Trump early on in his presidential campaign. Second Amendment advocates have praised the Trump administration for rolling back some Obama-era policies, including one that banned the use of lead ammunition in national wildlife refuges.
Too long, Washington has gone after law-abiding gun owners while making life easier for criminals, drug dealers, traffickers, and gang members. MS-13, you know about MS-13? It's not pleasant for them anymore, folks. It's not pleasant for them anymore. That's a bad group. Not pleasant for MS-13. Get them the hell out of here, right? Get them out.
And 2 young boys go viral for the best reason ever. This is awesome. The brothers find money on the sidewalk in Utah, then debate what to do with it for a little while. Their adorable conversation all caught on security camera. Listen.
Would you kind of want to keep it, or would you want would you want to do the right thing to do, or keep it? Do the right thing to do. Well, it's best to ask someone. But Bronx, you don't need to ask. Oh goodness, this is theirs, huh? Yeah. I know it's not. Yeah, let me just tie it so they won't see it to steal. Teeny, I love you. Can we play?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, are these yours?
Yes, they are. Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll probably find them.
to